As much as we wish that trout always wanted to eat a big old grasshopper, they spend a lot of their time eating smaller bugs. A lot of anglers mistakenly write off using small flies because they seem like more trouble than they're worth. You need angel hair-thin tippet to tie them on. You need a magnifying glass to find them in your box, and then you've got no chance of seeing them when they're out there floating on the water. This seems like a lot more trouble than it's worth, right? Well, not really, because once you understand how to fish small flies, you open up a whole new world of trout you can catch, including some big ones. So, in this first part of a two-part episode, we are taking a deep dive into the world of fishing small dry flies. You'll learn how to rig them up, how to pick the right one, and a few other tricks of the trade to help these microscopic hooks work in your favor. This is Untangled Fly Fishing for Everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. It is freaking fantastic to be here this week talking about small dry flies. Another one of my all-time favorite topics to chat about. And we are not talking about the truly microscopic stuff, the hooks that are so diminutive that you need like 40/20 eyesight to see them. I don't know if that's a thing, but we'll just say that, I would assume 40/20 is better than 20/20 vision. I don't know anything about eyes other than that mine are bad. So there's an optometrist listening. Please tell me what's better than 20/20 vision, because I don't know. But we're not talking about those flies that are so small you'd need that kind of vision to see them. I did used to fish those a lot. I used to have size 28, 30, and 32 dry flies in my box. And I had 9X tippet spooled up, ready to go at a moment's notice. It was really fun, and the challenge of it was really fun, but it's ridiculous. You don't need them that tiny, I don't think. And we're not talking about the ones that are that small. We're talking about the ones that you can still actually see. You don't need eagle vision to be able to see them. And really, we're talking about those moments when you see those fish that are rising. Looks like they're eating nothing, but they're coming up, they're eating off the surface. You don't see any bugs on the surface, or maybe you see a couple of white dots and you think, why are they wasting their time and their energy to come up and eat something so small? And what really throws you for a loop is a lot of the times when you see these fish rising on what looks like nothing, they can be pretty big fish. And that begs the question, are they rising to actually eat, or are they just taunting you? Just like, hey, look at me, I'm here and you can't catch me. I wouldn't put it past them, because fish know, 100% they know. They might have brains the size of a strawberry, but they know how to push our buttons and they know how to taunt us. I believe that wholeheartedly. I've had too many instances where it felt like the fish just knew. Even clearly they don't, right? They don't have that awareness, but they do. In some way, I swear they've got that ability to just mess with us on a primal level. But honestly, all kidding aside, they are rising on some small dry flies a lot of times. Usually they're flies that are just a little bit too small to see unless you're right on top of them. And most of the time, those tiny flies that they're eating are going to be midges. And then sometimes you'll also see them eating really small mayflies as well. And it's most common for them to be eating those tiny mayflies right now in the spring and then again in the fall, because this is when the smallest mayflies of the year tend to hatch. Midges stay pretty small throughout the year. With a few exceptions, you'll get a couple hatches of slightly bigger varieties of midge throughout the year, but most of the time your midges are small. And then thankfully your mayflies that hatch in the summer, they tend to be a little bit bigger. They're not this extremely diminutive one like you do see in the spring and in the fall. So generally speaking, when they are coming up on what looks like nothing, yes, those fish are eating, and it's usually going to be some kind of midge or some kind of mayfly that they're snacking on. And when I say midge or mayfly, if you don't know what I'm talking about, these are just two species of aquatic insects that fish eat that make up part of a trout's diet. And they're active at different times of the year. And then with mayflies, there's a bunch of different varieties of mayflies that you'll see out there. And we've actually got this pretty great resource, gives you a high-level overview of everything you need to know about these bugs, when they hatch, when you can expect to find them, what ones you should be fishing at a certain time of the year. It's our year-round hatch chart. It's completely free, and I'll throw a link to that in the show notes if you want to grab it, kind of follow along with what we're doing. I'll throw a link here on the screen as well, a QR code. If you're watching the video podcast, you can scan that and grab it and just get some more context for the bugs that we're talking about if you're not super familiar with them. So these smaller dry flies can be really effective this time of year because, again, this is when you're going to have a large concentration of those small flies hatching. And honestly, they do pretty well for me in those dog days of summer too. When we get into the period of time, the caddis have slowed down a little bit, and you're out fishing really early or late in the day. You're trying to avoid the heat of the day when the water is too warm to ethically fish for trout. You'll see a lot of small flies out early in the morning, late at night, and big fish are happily eating those at that point too. And that'd be, midges that are coming off then as well. But they're effective spring, fall, and then those dog days of summer is really when I focus on fishing these small dry flies. And, just to prove that I'm not blowing smoke here, that you actually can catch fish this way. Years ago, I was out with my buddy Ryan McCullough. We were out fishing this brown trout stream that's notorious for fish that want tiny dry flies. And I had on a size 24 parachute midge that Ryan had tied. I think I had 7X tippet on. It was ridiculous. And I was fishing this rising fish. I could see it. It was coming up on the other side of the seam. And I finally got a really nice drag-free drift. I got that fly right in front of the fish, right in the rhythm of it. And he comes up just so slowly and just gulp, goes down with the fly. And I set the hook and got it into the net somehow. I was fishing a 4-weight, so that helped with that 7X tippet. It was a 21-inch brown trout. I'm not exaggerating. We actually measured it. A 21-inch brown trout ate a size 24 parachute midge. So yes, fish will eat these tiny flies, and sometimes they will be very large fish that eat these very small flies. Often, that's going to be during spring and summer like we just talked about. So, how do you tell what fly they're eating, especially when they're so tiny? And then, does it even matter if they're that small? Does it matter what fly you pick, which one you actually tie on? Aren't they all the same at that point? They're just a couple wisps of thread and maybe a half turn of hackle and 2 pieces of poly yarn for a parachute post. I mean, does it really matter? In my experience, it's another one of those, it depends. My favorite answer to give to any question that I get asked here, because everything really does just kind of depend. But I've found that sometimes they get really picky about the small flies and sometimes they don't. I do tend to err on the side of the fish caring and wanting the correct fly. So I'm doing my best to match their food source exactly. So the process that this looks like for choosing this correct small dry fly is the first thing that you've got to do is figure out if the fish are eating emergers or if they're eating a dun off of the surface. And for those who don't know, emergers are that life cycle stage of the aquatic insect right before they hatch into fully winged adults. They're rising up through the water column. They're in the surface film. They're right below the surface. They're getting out of their nymphal shuck. They're spreading their wings. They're becoming a full-fledged real-life bug. And then the cripples, or pardon me, not the cripples, the duns, the adults, they are, that fully formed version of the bug. They're ready to dry their wings off, fly around, mate, and then come back and lay some eggs in the water and continue to propagate the species. So you can tell if a fish is eating an emerger or a dun just based on the way it comes up and eats off the surface. We call that the rise form. If the fish comes up and you see its nose break the surface, or you see most of its head come out, or the rise is a little splashy, a little bit louder, that's a dead giveaway that they are eating something off the surface. They're eating that dun. They could be eating the cripple as well, and we'll get into what cripples are and why they're going to be a cheat code for you here, and we'll get into that in a minute. But when they're eating off of the surface, you're going to see their nose, their head break the surface. Rise will be a little bit louder, a little bit noisier than an emerger eat. And an emerger eat, You might see them break the surface a little bit, but usually what you're going to see is you'll see the rings of the rise that spread out when a fish comes up to eat off the surface. You'll see those, but you won't really see the fish's head. You'll see more of the dorsal fin and the tail fin poking up through the water because the fish come up and they eat right below the surface. So they rise up. They don't really break the surface with their mouth, but their back and their tail continue up and break through the surface a little bit as they level out, and then they go back down to eat other bugs again. So that's how you tell if they're eating that emerger or if they're eating the dun. Now, the next step of this is you've got to decide if they're eating a mayfly or a midge. And this is when things can get tricky because midges and mayflies, they're both hatching during spring and fall, so they can hatch at the same time. And that makes it tough to know exactly what they're eating. It really can feel like a guessing game. And my rule of thumb is if it's spring and fall, when it's going to be small mayflies and midges hatching, I always start with mayflies. And if I get ignored, I just switch to my midges. And honestly, there's no rhyme or reason for why I do that. It's just what I do. I think it's a little bit of the optimist in me. I want the fish to be eating mayflies because the mayflies, they're not around all the time like midges. They're kind of fleeting a little bit. They're pretty. They're a little bit bigger than midges. There's just a little bit more elegance to them. A bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. But maybe that's why I think, oh, well, they're eating mayflies, and I just tie those on. Honestly, you can take your pick, okay? I only deviate from tying on mayflies first if I don't see any on the water, or if I see big piles of midges on the water that are clearly outnumbering whatever mayflies I see. At that point, I'll go ahead and just tie the midges on. But even then, it's still not a guarantee that I've picked the right small fly. So there is a fair amount of guesswork that goes into this. If you want, you're more than welcome to hedge your bets with a double dry rig that uses one mayfly and one midge. And we'll get into rigs here in just a second. That's not a bad way to go with it at all. I still tend to go with 2 mayflies first, and then if I get refused, I'll switch to midges and then, continue to refine from there. But what I really want to focus on here with fishing small dry flies is this. I think it's really overlooked in the small dry fly game, and it's almost like a cheat code. And that would be fishing crippled versions of the adults. Okay. And in part 2 of the show, we're going to focus on the emergers that I mentioned earlier and tips for fishing them, because there's some different things, different ways you can effectively fish emergers. It's a little different than what you're doing with cripples. Not a ton, but definitely understanding, more of the why behind the emergers. But I really want to talk about cripples in the first part of this episode because, again, I think they're a little bit of a cheat code. Okay, they really are overlooked. In my experience, a lot of the anglers that I get to talk to don't fish cripples nearly as much as I do. So a crippled mayfly, let's define what that is for a sec. A crippled mayfly or a crippled midge, it's exactly what it sounds like. Okay, it's an adult version of either of those bugs that has something wrong with it. Maybe its wing is broken, its leg is broken. It's like me when I'm trying on new waders, right? You get them up past the belly and then you can't get them down again. They're stuck in the shuck. they're trying to get out of their nymphal shuck and they just can't quite do it. There's something wrong, something affecting this fly from getting out of the water and going to mate, propagate the species and do whatever it is they want to do. And fish tend to really love cripples because even if the fish are keyed in on eating the normal adults, the duns that are floating on the water, because cripples can't escape the fish, I think trout really key in on them because they'll be rising, they'll be eating the duns, but the duns, they can fly away. They can escape. Their wings are fine. They're in good shape. But the cripples can't. And I think the fish know that. So I think they really key in on those cripples because of that. And a lot of times I will fish cripples during a big hatch when there's just a bunch of adults on the water and the fish are clearly only eating adults. I don't see emerger rises anywhere. They're eating adults. I'll still fish cripples because I feel like I've got a better hookup ratio with cripples than I do just trying to fish another adult out there that looks like the 1,000 other bugs that are on the water. It's kind of hard to stand out at that point. But the cripples, they stand out. They grab the fish's attention. And so that's one part of why they're a little bit of a cheat code, because they do stand out from the mess of all the adults. The other reason they're a cheat code, especially when it comes to fishing smaller flies, when you see fish rising on those smaller dry flies, is a lot of the crippled patterns are tied on slightly larger hooks, because the cripples, a lot of the times, are going to be tied to accommodate a trailing shuck. So the nymphal shuck, it might make that size 18, or pardon me, that size 22 midge. When you throw the nymphal shuck on there, it might look like a size 20 to the fish, or it might even look like a size 18 to the fish, right? It might jump them up that much in size, because essentially you've got the nymphal shuck that the dry fly was in, and then that cripple trying to get out of it. So that's like two of the fish or two of the flies stuck together. So it essentially doubles the size of the fly. So you're going to be tying these cripples on larger hooks to accommodate that. Sometimes you'll tie them on larger hooks to accommodate bigger broken wings. Maybe you exaggerate that the wings are busted. Maybe you exaggerate that the tails are a little messed up. Or maybe all the above. Maybe you tie a cripple that looks really messed up with everything. It's got a trailing shuck and broken wings and everything. So what you're doing with this is you are still getting the same shape, the same color of a real life cripple, but you're fishing them on a hook that's a size 18 instead of fishing 22s to closely mimic the adults that the fish are eating. Okay, that cripple comes by and they're expecting to see it that big, but you have to tie it on a little bit bigger of a hook because there's just a bit more fly there. So that's why it's a little bit of a cheat code, because you can use these slightly bigger hooks during these small hatches when the fish are keyed in on the really tiny bugs. It's a lot easier to see. It's a lot easier to hook them up. And then again, those cripples stand out from amongst all the fine adults. The cripple stands out, and I do think the fish like them quite a bit. So as far as flies that I like to represent cripples, when it comes to mayfly cripples, I really like variations of the last chance cripple. That's been kind of my go-to. I build a lot of my own custom cripple patterns off of that one. Just it's got a good base for being a pretty great imitation of a lot of crippled mayflies. And I'll have that in sizes about 16 to 18 is my go-to for these smaller mayfly hatches. If the mayflies hatching are like an 18, I'll go to a 16 cripple. If they're a 20, I'll go to an 18 cripple. I go about one size up with my cripples, just because again, you're accommodating a little bit, more material on the hook, so you need a little bit bigger hook. And that's just how I've done it for a good long time, is going up about one size. That seems to work really well for me in a lot of the different mayfly hatches I've been able to fish. We've also got some last chance cripples available in 3-packs if you are interested in grabbing any of them. I'll throw a link in the show notes, or there'll be a link here on the screen as well if you're interested in grabbing some of those last chance cripples and getting prepped and ready for the mayfly season that we've got coming up. And then for midges, I've kind of come up with my own midge emergers over the years, because this is so interesting about midge patterns out there. I feel like it's kind of like buffalo sauce recipes. There's a lot of them, but if you want that authentic, really good, just perfectly savory, not too bitter because it's so spicy. And I'm one of those fellers. I enjoy my spice, but I don't like the bitter side of spicy. I still want a lot of depth of flavor to my spice, right? So that makes your homemade buffalo sauce can sometimes be challenging for that reason, because you're trying to balance the spice and the savory. And anyways, I really need to start a food podcast, don't I? Anyways, it's like that though with midge patterns, where it feels like people aren't as willing to give up a lot of their different midge merger patterns for whatever reason. They're just, it's hard to find the exact perfect one all the time. So I've experimented a lot with my own, but I've based a lot of that off of the mother shucker which is a really good place to start, as well as Pat's midge, which is tied by Pat Dorsey. And then the sparkle dun. That's another great base for some kind of midge emerger, some kind of cripple, and if I said emerger, I meant cripple. I'm really sorry. Because I've got both of those bumping in my head because we're going to do part 2 of this show about emergers. So if I said emergers at all lately, I meant cripple. I have not had enough of my Diet Coke to start the day off yet. That is for heck, I'm sure. But anyways, the sparkle dun can imitate that cripple. It can imitate an emerger too. It's a really dual purpose fly. And that's another great place to start. It can work for mayflies and it can work for midges too. So it's a really great one to have for these hatches regardless. And we do have some sparkle duns in our 3-packs as well. If you want to grab some, if you don't tie, again, you want to get prepped for these hatches, I'd recommend grabbing those. So when fish are eating tiny dry flies, and I am trying to coax them into eating my fake one, I really do go with the cripple instead of the dun a lot of the time. And again, that's like my little cheat code. That's what I do to try and cut through the noise of all the adults on the water, try and grab the fish's attention and get them to look at my fly. A good example of this. Last year, one of my local tailwaters here has a beautiful blue wing olive hatch. And I think it was about April, so about a month-ish from now. And I got into this hatch one afternoon that the bugs were thick. They were like crawling up my nose. They were so thick. I was having a wonderful time with it. But the fish were ignoring a lot of what I was throwing at them. So I switched from the dun. I started out with a dun that day for whatever reason. So I switched from the dun over to a cripple. And I started catching fish left and right, including some really big rainbows, really big cutthroat. And the hatch lasted for about a week. We had really good fishing until word got out about it and everybody showed up. And then once the fish started getting pressured, the fishing really kind of sucked after that. But before everybody showed up and ruined it for me, inconsiderate people, how dare someone go out and fish a river during a hatch and think they've got a right to it when dadgummit, that's my river. I ain't sharing that with anybody. For the internet trolls, that was very clearly sarcasm. I love to see other people on the water. It's just a fact of life that, you know, when you get a couple hundred people fishing the same hatch for a week in a row, the fish get really gun shy to eat anything. So it's just what happens. If you get to catch these hatches before word gets out that they're on, you'll be in for some great fishing. But that whole week, it was all cripples. That's what they wanted. Even with all the adults on the water, cripples just really worked for me. I would definitely just recommend trying a lot more cripples as we move into the heart of spring dry fly season. Again, they're a little cheat code for you. Now, a couple other points on just rigging these up, fishing these small flies, because that's part of it, right? We've picked our fly, but hey, Durant, how do I get it to the fish? What do I do? Well, glad you asked. I'm glad you waited and stayed patient. I wasn't going to forget this part. Big thing that you got to do is you got to go with a little bit longer leader because you got to avoid some drag because, again, we're in low, clear water this time of year when these hatches are coming off. You might see flows start to bump up a little bit, but still going to be low, still going to be clear. And when you're fishing these tiny, tiny flies, you end up needing smaller tippet. This is the only time of the year that I really bump down from 4X and I'll go to 5 and 6X this time of year. And I will create a longer leader so that I can get a really soft presentation. I don't want to just go from 4X to 6X. I want to taper, go 4, then 5, then 6. So I'll tie like 2 feet of 5X tippet onto my 4X leader, and then I'll tie 2 feet of 6X tippet onto the 5X. So I'll end up with, instead of a 9-foot leader, maybe a 13-ish foot leader. Get me a little bit more length, extend my drift, right? Get me a really nice, delicate presentation. So at that point, you do need to take a little bit longer on your casting stroke because you've got more length on the leader and you don't want to just move your cast as quickly as you normally would because that's how you end up with wind knots and end up with tangles. When you add length to your leader, you have to slow your casting stroke down just a bit to avoid all those tangles. Okay. So that's your first step. The next step is when they are this small, I do a double dry fly rig a lot of the time. Even if it's an 18 sparkle dun, for example, that sits really low in the water. And a lot of these cripples, they're on the surface and the fish will eat them like it's a dun. So the rise form will look pretty similar to how a dun's rise form looks. It just depends on where that cripple's sitting in the water form or in the water column. Some of the cripples might be just below the surface, so it'll look like an emerge or eat. Some of the cripples will be right on the surface. It depends on the individual bug more than anything. But I will still tie that double dry fly rig on regardless of where my crippled fly is sitting, whether it's sinking or just floating, because I'll throw like a size 16 parachute bluing in front of it, and then I'll put my 18 sparkle dun or whatever cripple pattern I picked about 18 inches behind it on 6X tippet. And then that parachute adult that I've tied on, it does have a chance of catching fish because it's matching the other adults that are on the water. But then I can see where my small one is. And again, if that cripple is sitting lower in the water, I can see it. If it's sitting higher on the water, it helps me see it, helps me track it. And then that bigger dry fly acts almost as an indicator. When a fish comes up and eats your cripple, your bigger dry fly will move. So if you lose sight of it or whatever, you just find that bigger dry fly. It's a really effective way to fish these hatches. I really do like double dry fly rigs in a lot of these hatches. One other thing to be aware of as well is that when the fish are coming up to eat these cripples, especially during these mayfly and midge hatches in early spring, they're not going to attack them the same way that brookies or cutthroat or smaller fish are going to hit an elk ear caddis in the middle of summer. And by that, I mean, a lot of those rises, they're very fast, they're very splashy, they're very loud, very quick. Okay. Those fish are moving, grabbing the fly, quickly going back down to slower water. With these smaller dry flies, they're not going to move as quickly. They're going to open their mouths slowly. They're going to close their mouth slowly, and then they're going to go back down underneath the water slowly. And your job is to time the hook set appropriately so that you don't rip the fly out of their mouth, break your fly off, because you will do that if you set too hard and too quickly. You'll just break that 6X tippet off. Or just setting too early and never touching the fish. And then if you set too early, you're making all that noise of the line ripping across the water, and that might scare the fish, put them down a little bit. So you really have to make sure you're timing your hook sets correctly. And that just comes down to watching the fish and watching your flies. So you see a fish come up, you see the fish rise. Generally what you want to do, you want the fish to come up, you want it to grab your fly, and then you want the fish to start going back down under the water. That's when you want to set the hook. You might have heard some people recommend as well that you see the fish come up and eat your fly. You say something like, "God save the queen" is the phrase that gets thrown around. I don't know why. I don't know why that's the one that we picked, but see the fish come up and eat your fly, say "God save the queen," and then set the hook. And that hook set needs to be firm but not fast. Don't yank on it, don't jerk on it. Just get that slack line pressed against the cork grip so you get a nice tight connection, and just lift firmly with the rod. If you yank, if you pull, if you twist your body, especially with these smaller flies, you're going to break them off, or you're just going to rip them right out of the fish's mouth. So it needs to just be a delicate but firm hook set. Okay, and again, watch the fish, wait for them to start going down with your fly before you set the hook, because if you set as soon as you see their mouth come up, you're going to pull the fly out of their mouth 10 times out of 10, and then you're going to be frustrated because your buddies are going to be catching fish and you're not. You're going to feel like an idiot when they explain to you that you're setting the hook too early. And yes, that was me a long time ago. One of the best mayfly hatches I have ever seen. I caught maybe 2% of the fish that I could because I was so quick on the hook set. I didn't know how to slow down, watch the fish, and just wait and be patient for it. So that really is the stuff to remember with your small flies. And then again, cripples, they're like a cheat code. Use more of them. I think they're underutilized in a lot of the dry fly game, especially this time of year. This could be a great time to fish them. And again, next week, we are going to continue discussing small dry flies with an emphasis on fishing emergers. So you definitely want to make sure you tune in for that episode as well. We'll just stack more of this knowledge. but focus on how to fish those emergers versus the cripples that we talked about today. And that's going to do it for the opening part of the show this week. Thank you all for listening to that. If you got any more questions about cripples, just drop them in the comments. Let me know how else I can help with that. But it is time to move on to the Q&A portion of this week's show. And every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, please send those in to us. There's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And definitely keep these questions coming in, folks, because I read every single question that comes into Untangled. And whether your question makes it on the show or not, it's not because I don't like you. It's not because I think you're weird or funny looking. I mean, you don't even send your pictures in, so how would I know what you look like? It's got nothing to do with that. But, I pick the questions that I do, but every single question that comes in informs what we're going to talk about. Because if I get 2 or 3 questions in a row about a similar topic, then I'll just make the open of the show about that. Okay, because clearly it's on your minds. You guys sending these questions in, they shape not just the podcast, but a lot of the content we do here at VFC. So continue to send those questions in. Please get them in. And I will continue to read every single one that comes in and use them to help shape the content. All right, enough of that yammering. Let's get into the questions. Michael from Wisconsin has our first question, writes in and says, I'm new to fly fishing and I've learned a lot from you guys and I really appreciate all you do. I primarily fish small streams in the Wisconsin driftless region, which are probably 3 to 10 feet wide on average. As a result, the vast majority of my casts are directly upstream. I also understand from listening to you guys that getting a natural drift is critical to the presentation. As I am stripping line and my nymph is coming directly at me, is there a way to make sure the drift is natural looking? I understand the concept of mending, but I think that is useful when the nymph is coming back at you at an angle. Am I missing something? Michael, great question. And I don't think you're missing anything at all because you're 100% right. Mending is used the most when you're fishing at an angle. You're not fishing directly upstream or downstream of yourself. So what I mean by that is you're not facing upstream. You're not facing downstream. You're in the river and you're facing perpendicular to the current. You're still casting upstream, but you're casting at like a 45-degree angle upstream. And then as the nymph rig and the indicator is coming back to you, that's when you start mending. And all mending is picking up your fly line and moving it so that the fly line and the indicator are moving at the same speed so you don't have drag, because drag is the killer of good presentations. That's the dead giveaway that it's not real, right? So all mending is just lifting a moving line to eliminate the possibility of getting any drag. And often that means you're going to throw an upstream mend. That's probably the most common mend to throw when we're nymphing, just to make sure that the line doesn't get downstream of the indicator and start pulling that indicator faster than it should be moving. So if you're standing and facing directly upstream in the river, you're 100% right. Mending doesn't really make any sense at that point because how are you going to lift and mend your line above your indicator? You don't want to do that. That's going to move the indicator, yank it towards you. It's going to get it all cattywampus. It just ain't going to be right. So you're thinking 100% correct on that. The only time that you might need to mend when you're facing upstream and casting directly upstream is if your cast doesn't land exactly where you want it to. Let's say your indicator lands a little bit more to the left in some dead water and all your flies land in the current. You might mend to the left a little bit to try and get everything in the same current speed. But you also might just recast at that point too. But that's about the only time I can really see mending happening. Okay. But the key though is making sure that when you are fishing upstream, your indicator and your fly line are landing in the same current because you want them drifting at the same speed back towards you. That is going to be your dead giveaway that you don't have any drag and that your presentation is as great as you can possibly make it. They're moving at the same speed, your indicator and your fly line. So as long as those two are drifting together, you don't see any drag on your indicator, that should mean that your presentation is as natural looking as it's possible to be. And drag on your indicator, that just looks like that little wake behind it. It's the same thing as dragging a dry fly. It looks like it's being moved and pulled in a way that's not natural. We want everything drifting and moving with the current because that's what the bugs naturally do in the water. One other thing to think about too is once your nymphs are down deep in that strike zone, if they're down deeper on the bottom, your indicator might be moving slightly slower than all the other water around it. There won't be any drag, but maybe it's moving just a titch slower because your flies are down on the bottom. They're in the strike zone where the water does move slower than up on the surface. So that might mean your indicator's moving just a little bit slower as well. I wouldn't freak out about that. Again, the only time I'm going to be concerned about drag on an indicator cast directly upstream of me is if I see that indicator moving and dragging around. And last thing, just make sure that you're in the strike zone too. That goes to presentation as well. When we're nymphing, the strike zone is generally that top or the bottom third of the water column. So being about, anywhere from 5 to 12 to 18 inches off of the bottom. If you can get your flies down there and in that strike zone, you're going to be in business for a good presentation. So really good question, man. Thanks for sending it in. Claudia from Montana has our next question. She writes in and says, if you had to pick between upgrading your rod versus reel first, which is more essential? Thank you for always teaching me something new. Cheers to you and the crew. Claudia, this is a great question. Thanks for sending it in. Short answer, always the rod first. Always what you want to upgrade. For trout fishing, reels are just basically fancy line holders. I've said that before. I'll continue to say it. It's something I believe. You do not need a 3 or 4 or 5, or I even see some trout reels at $600. You don't need that. Okay. You need a simple reel that's got a reliable drag system that will help you handle average sized trout in the rivers that most of us fish. Okay. All these other reels, they're beautiful. They're amazing. They look beautiful. They've got a drag that can stop a freight train. But you don't need that. How often are you getting into fish that big that you're cranking your drag all the way down? Very rarely. Okay. In fact, not does sound like I'm trying to brag or not, but I fish quite a bit. I've been able to fish in a lot of places. I've had the good fortune to fish and to catch a few really big trout. And I can count on like 3 fingers the amount of times that I've had to crank my drag all the way down for a trout. And 2 of those times they were foul hooked. The other time it wasn't. And that was a 26-inch cutthroat I caught in a river it was a creek. It wasn't even a river. Just an absolutely stupid big fish that shouldn't have been in there that I caught. It's a whole other story for a whole other time. But that was about the only time that I really needed every ounce of the drag that I had to help me land that fish. The rest of the time, yeah, I've needed drag in some instances. A 20-inch fish in heavy current, you need drag for that. But how often are we encountering 20-inch fish in heavy current? Okay, for a lot of us, that's not an everyday occurrence. And even when it is, knowing how to play fish and use the reel to your advantage, you don't need those drag systems that can stop the freight train. You need something that's going to handle the vast majority of your trout fishing. You don't need to drop that $300 or $400 on it. Okay. A simple disc drag reel. If it's a disc drag reel and it's adjustable, meaning you can turn it from light pressure to high pressure, and it's built from machined aluminum, that's all the reel you need for trout fishing. Unless you're consistently getting into really big trout. And if you are, drop a comment. Let me know. I'd love to come fish with you. If you're consistently getting into fish where you need a Nautilus or a hatch level reel to handle them, please let me know. I would love to come fish with you. Okay. And the other thing to remember too is that for more than 100 years, everybody who fly fished, they didn't have dish drag reels. They had the old click and pawl reels, the old Fluger Medalist style stuff, where they maybe had a tiny bit of adjustment or they had no adjustment. It was just one resistance setting, and they had to fight the fish through a combination of palming the reel spool as it spun around and holding onto the line as it went out of the reel. That was how they had to fight fish. That, and then exerting rod pressure and fighting them against the current and everything else that goes into fighting fish, but that's all they had. And, considering we hear so much about how great the good old days were, I don't think it's crazy to assume they caught enough fish to be happy even with their primitive reels. Okay. So the reason why I say to upgrade the rod is your reel doesn't really matter all that much. Get what you want. I'm not telling you not to go buy that stuff. I have nice reels. I've had the fortune to get a couple of them. They're really great tools, but I don't use them to their full. I don't use every ounce of their capability. So it does feel like a waste in a lot of ways to have these really nice reels that don't get fully utilized. Okay. The reason that I say to upgrade the rod really has a lot to do with the episode we did on fly rods a few weeks ago too. But the fly rod's your most important tool. It is the tool that you use to send your fly line, your leader, and your flies to the fish. You need a rod that matches how you fish and the fish that you're chasing. That is the big thing to focus on. And for us trout folks, that often means we're getting a 9-foot 5-weight. That's the rod that really fits the bill for a lot of what we're doing. And I got into this a bit on the recent episode about fly rods. And one guy told me I was in the fly rod company's pocket for this opinion, which I thought was hilarious. I'm most assuredly not, right? I want you guys to live real life. That's my goal of doing the show, is I want to help you. And all this information is to that end, to help you have a great time out of the water. And for me, I look for rods around the $200 mark. That's where I personally start to say, you know what? This is a rod that's going to work well for me, and it's going to do what I need to. And I may or may not need to upgrade with this rod, but about that $200 mark is where I start to see rods that are going to function and do things well. And the reason for that is rods, once they get to about this point, they have enough feel and feedback to be effective fishing tools. And that matters, okay? Because rods that are super cheap, they're often super stiff too. They might be a little bit easier to cast because the fast action rods are a lot easier to cast. But as you learn and as you grow as an angler, you're going to want to become the best you can be, right? That's what we want to do. We want to get as good as we can at fly fishing. So that means you need to learn how to manipulate your fly cast to get desired results in whatever situation you're in on the water. And with a rod that offers enough feel and enough feedback, you're not just memorizing the timing of the rod cast, but you're learning to recognize what it feels like. You're learning to recognize the rhythm of a good fly cast. Okay, with rods that don't give you feel and feedback, you're just memorizing timing. You're not actually understanding the mechanics, the reasoning, the why behind the fly cast working and not working. And then you don't have the skills and the ability to manipulate the fly cast in the way that you need to in any situation. Okay, you need to make this reach cast. You need to steeple cast. You need stack mending, whatever it is. Being able to manipulate the rod in a way that gets you to the desired result comes from being able to feel what your line is doing. And on a lot of those super cheap rods, you're not going to get that feel. That's why my personal place where I say, hey, this rod's going to be good, and I might not need to upgrade because this rod will meet my needs for a while, is about that $200 mark. Okay. And our fly flinger, it's about $200. It's a great example of this. We designed it to be soft enough that you've got feedback so you can learn how to be a great caster, but it's still fast enough that you've got the backbone, you've got the power you need to deal with the wind, deal with some of those bigger fish, but it's a tool designed to help you become a better angler. It's not a tool designed to just sell a bunch at a certain price point like a lot of the super cheap fly rods are. So that's my 2 cents. Upgrade the rod. You don't need to spend $1,000 on a top tier rod. They're really fun to use. They're really pretty. And if you like pretty stuff, definitely go buy one, but you don't need one. Okay? You don't need them. As great as those rods are, and I'm being completely honest, as much as I love my top tier rods, and a lot of it's nostalgia because I've been very blessed and very lucky to get to fish a lot of these rods, and I really love some of them, and especially a couple of my old Winstons. The nostalgia of fishing them because I fished them for so many years before I got married, and not my fishing didn't change, but the time on the water I spend changed a little bit, but not for the bad. Again, that's a whole other thing, but there's a lot of nostalgia baked into some of those other rods. as much as I love them for the nostalgia factor, if I'm being completely objective, our fly flinger, some of the other rods, around that $200 price point, they get the job done to like 90% of the degree that those really expensive rods do. The expensive rods are lighter. They're probably going to be a little bit more accurate. They're a little bit more fun to use because, they did cost a little bit more. And I think there's something to say for that if you're the kind of person who cares about that stuff. But they're so close in performance, objectively, fly flinger especially. They're so close in performance that at the end of the day, if you know how to cast well, and if you know how to present flies well, you can do it with whatever rod that gets put in your hand. So the need for the really expensive stuff isn't there. They're fun, they're wonderful to use, but there's not a need for them once you understand what you're doing. So again, that's my 2 cents on it. I would upgrade the rod. It's going to help you become a better angler because you will learn what a good cast feels like. The rod does not make the angler, but a rod that doesn't give you feedback and feel is going to leave you at a disadvantage when it comes to learning how to cast and learning how to manipulate your fly line out on the water. And if you can't do that, that's when you'll end up struggling in this sport. So a rod that gives you feel and feedback is an absolute must. Upgrading to something that gives you that, that's what I would recommend doing way before you touch the reel. So hopefully that wasn't too much of an answer for you, but I appreciate the question. Thanks. Joey from Minnesota has our next question, writes in and says, will fish really refuse a dry fly if it is too big? Say the hatch is a size 22, but I'm fishing a 14 or a 16. Joey, give me a chance to use my favorite response again. It depends. Oh, I appreciate it, man. Thank you. Usually, I would say yes to answer your question. And the reason for that is look at our right fly formula, right? Our formula for picking a fly, even if you don't know anything about aquatic insects. What's the most important thing to do when you're matching a fly in your box to a real life bug out on the water? Tell you to match size first. That matters more than anything else. And especially when the size disparity gets as big as what you're describing here, a size 22 and going all the way to a 14, that's a pretty big size difference, okay? It's like going to that restaurant that your wife's wanted to go to. Excuse me. She's wanted to go to for forever. You order dinner. You're really hungry. You're excited. And then the waiter brings you out this tiny plate, and the plate's half filled with this bougie-looking food. And you're pretty upset because you just dropped all that money on food that you can eat in like 2 bites, and it's just vegetables that masquerading under some sauce. That ain't real food anyways. No, not that would be from personal experience. But no, trout are the same way, okay? They just want to eat what they're already seeing. They're going to be upset if they're not going to eat what they're already seeing, because the way that trout feed is that once a hatch starts or once they're actively feeding, they're basically just using pattern recognition to decide if something is or isn't food. So something will drift by, and if that something looks close enough to the image that the trout has in its head of this is what food is right now, the trout will eat it. If it doesn't really match that image, they'll refuse it. And it's not always that simple, and it's not always that black and white, but for the purposes of this exercise, we'll just go with that. So if there's a hatch of size 22 midges and you toss a size 14 elk-hair caddis out in the mix, sure, the fish has probably seen that caddis before, but it's not seeing it right when the midges are coming off. So it doesn't fit the pattern of what they're expecting. So they just ignore it. Okay. Trout live in the moment. So you do need to relatively match what they're eating. That's an important thing to do. Now, again, this being said, there's probably tons of examples, and I'm sure we'll get some comments about it. It's even happened to me when it's a bunch of small flies coming off and you throw like a size 14 caddis in that hatch of size 22 midges, and it works. Again, I've seen that work myself. Sometimes it will. That's why I said, it's not always this cut and dried and black and white, but I found that that's very often the exception and not necessarily the rule. That's not necessarily going to be something you can depend on happening consistently. So that is what I would focus on myself. And there is this concept of unmatching the hatch, which we actually covered in Monday's show this week. tip of the week number 5. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to it. It's all about unmatching the hatch, and I get into a bunch more detail on that. It's an audio only show. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts, but that's the direction I would head. And you can learn a lot more about the concept of unmatching the hatch there. But long story short, even if I'm going to unmatch the hatch to try and make fish take note of my fly, like if the hatch is so thick and it's so good and I want the fish to see my fly amongst the millions of naturals on the water, even at that point, I'm really only going to size up by maybe 1, maybe 2 sizes at the most. So if it's a hatch 18s, I'll go with 16. If it's a hatch 16s, I'll go with 14 if I really want to stand out. I really won't go like from a 22 to a 14. That's usually just too much of a size disparity to make even unmatching the hatch work. So long story short, I wouldn't try to unmatch the hatch by more than a size or 2. And then often just try to match the size as best you can. And I think you're going to have a lot more success doing that than hoping for the one-off of when the fish that are eating those size 22 midges decide, yeah, I'll eat that big caddis too. So just my 2 cents on it though. But good question. I appreciate you sending it in. And that wraps up the Q&A portion of the show this week, folks. And it is time to visit the Live Real Life moment. Every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing a story and picture from folks out in the VFC audience who are living real life. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment you would like to share, please send those in. There's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment is from Calvin, who writes in and says, "Hi all, I just started fly fishing about 2 weeks ago. I've spin fished for years, but now finally got the itch to try fly fishing. As a teacher, I get summers off and live in Colorado. I'm sure Spencer will have a light jab at that one. But I wanted a new hobby that wouldn't be as strenuous as hiking in the Alpine. This past weekend, I went to hit the river, and after getting nothing all day long, trying different variations in different spots, I changed up my rig one last time. Immediately as I cast, I saw a massive trout slap the top of the water and down it went. I start pulling it in, and right as I get to the net, the rock that I had been standing on all morning shifts, and down I go into about 4 feet of water. Now soaked and frustrated, the fish swam off. I decided to change up where I was fishing. I went to a lake minutes from home and immediately began popping off left and right. I caught about 6 fish in a 30-minute span and left a happy angler. The lesson I learned is that some days, no matter what the rig is, no matter what should work, you may just have to try elsewhere. Also, just want to say thank you all so much for being so informational and helping me in my journey." Calvin, I love it. I would never poke fun at someone for living in Colorado. I mean, it's not like that state's just too crowded or anything and has traffic or the Denver Broncos or, I'm kidding, I don't have any ill will against the Broncos. No, I appreciate the little joke there, man. Yeah, no, I love this story though. And you're right. Sometimes you have to change things up. Sometimes just going elsewhere really is the secret sauce for the day. So I love the story. Thanks for sending it in. And that's going to do it this week, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate you being here with us every week. It means more to us than you can know. And if you want to do even more to make me happy, make my day, just go ahead and make sure you rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it. The more ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life, which is our entire goal here at VFC. We want you to have those unforgettable moments on the water. And speaking of that, it's time for me to quit my yammering. Let's go out, get on the water, enjoy yourselves, and until next week, live real life.